Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to today's global online event to officially launch our new publication, Seeds at Risk: Global Struggles for Control Over Food. This online event is jointly organized by the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung together with Swiss Aid and will be held in 4 languages in English, French, German, and Spanish with simultaneous interpretation, highlighting the vital role of seeds as the start of agriculture, forming the foundation of our food system and food access. Seeds at Risk provides insights from both the global north and south, shining a light on the challenges farmers encounter. These include restrictive seed laws, corporate pressure to adopt industrial seeds, and the burden of adhering to patent systems. Despite this mounting corporate influence, the publication also highlights a strong wave of resistance from farmers and communities advocating for sovereignty over their seeds. The collection serves as a call to action, celebrating those who champion seed diversity and resilience amidst adversity. My name is Refilwe Jwala, and I coordinate the Food Sovereignty Program at the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung that is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. The Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung is an internationally active, progressive nonprofit organization for political education. Since its founding in 1990, the foundation has been engaged in the analysis of social processes and developments. Through its teams in 26 regional and country offices, the foundation works with hundreds of partner organizations, political actors, and individuals in over 80 countries. The aim of the foundation's work is to strengthen emancipatory political forces. Swiss Aid is a Swiss-based NGO that has been engaging in development projects for over 75 years. The organization has offices in 8 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Agroecology and farmer seeds are at the core of Swiss Aid's work. Swiss Aid also engages in sensitization and advocacy in Switzerland and on the international level to make policies more respectful for populations in rural areas of the Global South. Today, we are honored to be joined by an esteemed panel of speakers for a critical dialogue on the corporate takeover of the global seed sector and the profound threats it poses to farmers' rights, seed diversity, and our collective food sovereignty. This event, as I mentioned earlier, is proudly co-hosted by the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and Swiss Aid, and we are thrilled to launch Seeds at Risk in partnership with our co-publishers, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA, the Association for Plant Breeding for the Benefit of Society, and the Southeast Asia Regional Initiative for Community Empowerment Series. I'm very pleased to introduce you to our first panel speakers. You are invited to ask questions to the speakers via the Q&A tool. Please also indicate to whom you would like to ask the question. Please use the chat for technical questions only. We will take questions and comments in writing only during today's event. Before we begin, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our esteemed panel of speakers. Firstly, Shalmali Gutal. Shalmali is a senior analyst with an activist think tank called Focus on the Global South, living in India. She has been working on trade, investment, debt, the commons, and people's rights to land, resources, and food for over 30 years, with emphasis on women's rights and democratization of governance. Her work includes research, writing, campaigning, and popular education on issues related to economic, social, gender, and ecological justice. Shalmali is also involved in several regional international platforms and spaces, including the Asian People's Forum, the Mekong Asian Environmental Week, Nyeleni Food Sovereignty, the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, and the Committee for World Food Security, the People's Working Group on Multi-Stakeholderism, as well as the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. In May 2024, Shalmali Gutal was appointed to the working group for the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas. Next, we have Professor Mamadou Goita, who is the Executive Director of the Institute for Research and Promotion of Alternatives in Development. He is a member of the International Panel of Experts on Food Systems, IPES Food, and a founding member of both the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa and COPAGEN, which is a coalition of peasant organizations and NGOs operating across 9 West African countries. A leading researcher and expert in seeds, agroecology, agricultural development, and land governance in Africa, Mamadou also teaches at several universities in the region, including Senegal, Burkina Faso, and Mali, as well as in France. For the past 6 years, he has presented a short course titled The Political Economy of Land Governance in Africa through the Network of Excellence on Land Governance in Africa. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Simon Degelo, who works at Swiss Aid as the event, and it will also be available online. We will have 3 rounds of discussions with our panelists, and we'll be opening for question and answer sessions. We will be taking your questions after the second round of our panel discussion before leading into the final one, after which we'll also open for Q&A. So I would like to pose the first question to Shalmali, our first panelist. Could you please explain the role of the working group and its plans in regards to the rights to seed, and how can peasants and civil society organizations, many of whom are present in this webinar, engage with the working group? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Joala. Can you hear me all right? Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Okay, that's very good. Well, thank you very much to Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung, to Swiss Aid, and to all the co-organizers, DRAFSA, and all the other co-organizers of this launch and this event. It's an honor for me to be here as a member of the working group on UNDROP, that is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People Working in Rural Areas. Now, very briefly, the role of the working group is to implement the declaration, to implement UNDROP as comprehensively and effectively as we can, and at the same time identify challenges and gaps in its implementation at different levels, national, regional, international, local, but also then identify, exchange, and promote good practices and lessons learned in the implementation of the declaration, and then facilitate and contribute to the exchange and building up of technical assistance, capacity building, transfer of technologies, and all kinds of international cooperation in order to make sure that UNDROP, the declaration, is effected in its full spirit and letter. And of course, in order to carry out this mandate, we need to seek and receive information from all relevant sources. Primarily, of course, the rights holders that are defined in Article 1 of the Declaration, but equally importantly, governments who are the duty bearers, state agencies, and then civil society, social movements, academics, and all relevant bodies, procedures, all relevant agencies and experts in the United Nations systems and human rights bodies. Now, we also prepare research reports twice a year, the first one to the Human Rights Council and one to the United Nations General Assembly. Now, Jwala, on the issue of your question on what do we plan to do with regard to seeds? Well, our plan is to address the issue of the rights to seed through the provisions of the declaration, which give us a very broad canvas to work through. Right in its preamble, the declaration, UNDROP, contains two very important recognitions in relation to seeds that are then addressed in its articles. So the most important recognition is the past, present, and future contributions of peasants and rural people in all regions of the world through the development and conservation and improvement of biodiversity, which constitutes the basis of food and agricultural production throughout the world, and then in their contribution to ensuring the right to adequate food and food security. So in this recognition, the declaration, and through the declaration, member states who approved the declaration, adopted it in the General Assembly, are affirming the central role of UNDROP's rights holders in nurturing the possibility of food through knowledge and practices related to natural and agricultural biodiversity. Another very important recognition is the special relationship and interaction between peasants and rural workers to land, water, and nature to which they're attached and on which they depend on their livelihood. Now, without land, water, and nature, there are no seeds and no biodiversity for UNDROP's rights holders. Now, these are not commercial arrangements for them, but these are integral to their survival in every way. Now, these recognitions are translated into protection to the right to seed, both directly and indirectly. Directly, there is Article 19 of the Declaration, which articulates the rights of peasants and rural people to the right to seed. This includes the right to protection of traditional knowledge relevant to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, the right to equitably participate in sharing the benefits arising from the utilization of plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, the right to participate in the making of decisions on matters related to conservation and sustainable use of these plant genetic resources, and very importantly, the right to save, use, exchange, and sell their farm-saved seed and all propagating material. There are many more clauses here. I won't go into those, but I request our audience to please read UNDROP, and you will see, read Article 19 carefully, and you will see the many more articles there, clauses in this article. There are then many other articles that indirectly support the rights of seeds of peasants and rural peoples. There's Article 5 on the right to have access and use in a sustainable manner all natural resources present in the communities, which are required for adequate living conditions, and the right to participate in the management of these resources. There's Article 10 on the right to active and free participation, directly and through representative organizations in the preparation and implementation of policies. There's Article 17 on the right to land individually and collectively, including the right to have access to sustainably used, managed land, water bodies, and all the associated coastal seas, fisheries, and all the resources that arise from them. There's Article 18 on the rights of peasants and rural people to have the right to conservation, protection of the environment, and through the conservation and protection of the productive capacity of their lands and the resources that they use and manage. There's Article 20, preventing the depletion and ensuring the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, again, to promote and protect, the full enjoyment of all the rights of peasants and working people. And now this year, in 2025, the working group is preparing two reports. The first one is on the conditions and challenges faced by UNDROP's rights holders, more than 6 years since UNDROP was adopted in the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. And the second report is on the right to participation of UNDROP's rights holders. Now, I know that time is short. There are a number of ways in which peasants and civil society and social movements can participate and engage with the working group. Jwala, should I address that now or should I wait for the next round? I leave it to you. What would you prefer?
If you can summarize it quickly, and
sure, okay.
Participants want more details.
Okay, I'll be very quick then. Well, one thing is, off to the audience, you can contact any one of us anytime. We are 5 working group members. from different parts of the world for regional balance. But we have a global mandate. We are open. We want to listen to you. We want to work directly. We can do a number of ways of working together. We want your advice in terms of what priority issues there are that we should be addressed. We can, if there are violations of rights in your areas, please contact us and let us know. We can investigate those. And we can also work with other UN agencies and other special rapporteurs to investigate those rights violations and then contact governments for relief. We can do awareness building and training with civil society, with social movements, with local governments on how to use UNDROP effectively at multiple levels. We would like to build a global, how we say, community of solidarity called Friends of UNDROP, which are all those who are committed to implementing the rights of peasants and rural workers. And it's extremely important that we work together on these, because the rights holders of UNDROP are not only peasants, they're also fisherfolk, they're small-scale food producers and providers. They're herders, they're indigenous people, they're forest communities, they're workers in rural areas. And the rights holders of UNDROP, as defined in Article 1 of the Declaration, are more than 50% of the world's population. So this is a huge group of people whose rights UNDROP seeks to protect and uphold. And 5 working group members cannot do it alone. So we request you to please contact us so we can work together in different ways. Thank you, Joella.
Thank you, Shamali, for your insights. I'm sure there'll be a lot more questions around that. Moving on, Mamadou, how do you see the role of farmer-managed seed systems in ensuring food sovereignty across Africa?
Thank you very much, and I really thank all the organizers. This is a very important webinar online with the current events that are taking place all over the world on the challenge around on the seed systems, because many countries drafting, changing, and confronting the policy framework with some of the international arenas, conclusion and dedication that have been really highlighted in some cases. So when we talk about farmers managed seed system in food sovereignty, we are talking about the different principles that are behind the food sovereignty. One of the key pillar and one of the key principles that has been defined on food sovereignty is the control of resources. The control of resources by those who are producing. And seed is a critical resource that can sustain the food sovereignty principles. So the first role that farmers managed seed system is playing is to have local control and adaptation on these resources. Because if you look at the way there is a corporate hijack today on the seed system, what is commercialized at international level, 6 companies are controlling more than 70% of a seed that exists actually on the international market. This means that controlling, the only way to bring back the control of this resource is just to develop farmer managed seed system. So the first role that is playing is to have a control and adaptation of these resources on territories. Territories meaning local level, but also national level and regional level, depending on the scale that we are talking about. The second role that the farmers managed seed system is playing is biodiversity preservation. This is really important. By cultivating diverse crops, the system safeguards agricultural biodiversity. This is vital for ecosystem resilience and sustainable food system. So this diversity acts as a buffer against crop failure and climate shocks, because this is really very important to relate this farming managed system and climate resilience that is we are talking about today. Thirdly, there is also a cultural and economic autonomy that the farmer seed system, managed seed system is also contributing to. Because as you see, some countries actually in the South, particularly in Africa, are investing so much resources buying vegetable seeds from particularly two countries. In the case of West Africa, this is Netherlands and France particularly. But this farming management system promotion will allow just to have this kind of autonomy, this kind of seed sovereignty, because you cannot talk about food sovereignty, we are talking about seed sovereignty. And this seed sovereignty should be based on the farming management system because they are locally adapted. They can, this system reinforce the cultural heritage and also the traditional knowledge that are behind the seed. Because when you talk about the seed, it's not the physical one only, but the cultural background of a food system is also related to the kind of seed that we are using for production. So it's the autonomy helps farmers and avoid the debt cycles where they are engaged to. Is another big issue that is related to the import of seeds from other continents that is creating conditions for some countries even not to produce because there are some political events like the one that we are facing with the war between Ukraine and Russia. That has been creating a big shock in some countries because some of these wheat seeds and others are coming from these countries and completely stopped coming in and have been completely destabilized. So it's creating also a condition for economic autonomy, but also the cultural autonomy and in the production system, but also the processing and the commercialization system and the nutrition system of food. So these are three key things that I think the farmer management system is playing as a role in food sovereignty.
Thank you so much, Mamadou, for your reflections. Simon, what is the situation of farmers in Europe and how is it different to the situation that Mamadou has just touched on about farmers in Africa?
Thanks, Revilo, for moderating and for the questions. Thanks for all the participants for your interest. When it comes to the situation in Europe, it's very different in the way that in Europe, very few farmers reproduce their own seeds compared to Africa, for instance, where in most countries, 80, 90, or even more % of the seed are farmer-managed seeds and not industrial seeds. The reason for that is, on one side, the seed regulation that has been restrictive for farmer seeds for a long time in Europe. But I think even more important is that we have a high level of specialization and division of labor in agriculture in Europe. So most farmers think it doesn't pay off to produce their own seeds, but they just specialize in growing the crops. Nevertheless, there are farmers and gardeners who have maintained farmers' varieties for a long time, sometimes because they like the particular flavor or because it's interesting for them to sell it as something that's very special that not every farmer can offer. And in recent time, this interest in these old varieties or farmers' varieties, this interest is increasing. In particular, many people are interested in it because sometimes these varieties are better suited for agroecological agriculture, for organic agriculture, or as Mamadou mentioned, also there is a high potential of these varieties for adaptation to climate change. Recently, more policy space has been made in Europe. Originally, the situation there was similar to other regions where it's quite strictly regulated what you can sell as seeds. In many continents, this is also kind of modeled according to the regulations in Europe that have been in place for much longer. But recently, there are more spaces being created. For instance, now in the new organic regulation, the new organic regulation of Europe allows the marketing of seeds from varieties that are not registered and not certified seeds is allowed. And currently the discussion are going on to also reform the EU seed regulation. It's still unclear where this is going to go because it's not only the farmers' organizations or pro-farmer seed side who is trying to influence that process, but it's also the seed industry trying to push back. But to summarize it, it's kind of an absurd situation that in countries where or regions where farmers need the farmer managed seeds and use it a lot, laws are often much more restrictive than they are now in Europe. So maybe this indicates also that there should be some change and questioning of the seed regulation that is so strict that even for Europe, it's not well suited.
Thank you, Simon, for that perspective on the differences between, in terms of the situation in Africa versus that in Europe. I'm going to be moving on and asking Shamali, drawing on experiences in India and neighboring countries, what are the critical policy shortcomings that jeopardize the seed and food sovereignty of peasant communities? How can state actors effectively tackle these changes at national and local levels?
Thank you, Rafilo. In my view, the biggest threats to seed and food sovereignty of peasant communities, there are three of them. I'll go through them very quickly. The first is corporate concentration in food and agricultural systems. And this is concentration that is both vertical and horizontal at various levels of food supply chains. My colleague Mamadou has already spoken about some of it. For example, the concentration in the seed industry, and the concentration in the global seed market. But of course, in addition to that, there are also other types of concentration. For example, 4 firms control 70 to 90% of global grain trade. 6 firms control globally 78% of agrochemicals, and so on. But this concentration is not only limited to the aspects and dimensions of the global food system where they can make profit. Corporations also have tremendous amount of power over policy making, international standards, regulation at national, regional, and international levels. And at national and international levels, we don't yet have policies that dismantle this concentration. Instead, we have international IPR, intellectual property rights and patent laws, and trade agreements that protect the interests of agribusiness corporations. Now, many countries do have supportive and good laws, but they're not implemented in their full spirit, and they can be manipulated in implementation. And they're also very complex for peasants and even legal experts to understand and use. And then also we have to see that with the retreat in public goods and services, social protection, peasant and rural communities are more vulnerable than before. So this concentration and power of corporations has multiple dimensions and facets, big threat. The second very big threat is the dispossession of peasant communities from their lands and territories, from their food territories. And this is happening because of a number of reasons. There's indebtedness and loss of land. Here again, the absence of appropriate and adequate, public supports and goods and services and protection increases the vulnerability of peasant communities. There are absence of clear ownership and land use claims. There are evictions. There's deforestation, conversion of lands and coastal areas for tourism, infrastructure, commercial ventures, and energy projects. There's the issue of land concentration, where land is becoming a financial asset. And with all the sort of, all the kind of market-based solutions that are being promoted in the name of climate change, we have also what is called green grabbing, which is a capture of nature and land for ostensibly green purposes. Again, we need clear laws here that are enforced without manipulation or abuse, that enable peasant communities to be able to stay on their lands and territories and build food sovereignty, and take many of the actions that Mamadou already articulated. The third big threat, I think, is the criminalization of rights, not only in relation to seeds, but also in relation to land, freedom of expression and association, to health, workers' protection, and so on. And in many countries, rural people who protest against land grabbing, deforestation, the destruction of waters and ecosystems, against, any kind of law or policy or regulation that affects them negatively, they are criminalized. They're called seditionists, agitators. They said they're threats to national security and so on, or that they're acting against national interests, which is not true, because they are actually saving the possibility of producing food and feeding people. They're saving the environment and biodiversity from which seeds and food can come, no? Corporations and businesses have far more legal protection than peasant communities have when it comes to upholding and defending their interests. And this needs to change. And, to address these, state actors at all levels need to work with peasant communities, with rural workers, with fisherfolk, with indigenous people, with women, with herders and pastoralists, and through their representative bodies, and advocates to develop policies and regulations and laws that advance food sovereignty.
Thanks so much, Shamali. And next, I'll be moving on to you, Mamadou, to hear about the challenges that are most prominent for African farmers. In your view, what are the biggest challenges today and how can they be addressed? And also, how can we start thinking about strategies for strengthening farmer seed networks to enhance seed diversity and climate resilience?
Thank you very much. I think these are very relevant questions. Shala has been mentioning many of the challenges that if you look at the political environment of seeds today, you can imagine that the first challenge is to address the policy environment. So the policies and legal barriers are one of the key challenges that these farmer seed systems are facing, because most of the laws that we have, the seed laws that exist in Africa, are just favoring certified seeds and marginalizing what is called in many documents as informal seeds. And that is dominating in many countries. We take West Africa, my country is Mali, 73% of the seed that are used in my country are from farmer seed control system. So this is huge. But at the same time, you look at the policy that we have actually is completely denying the role and place that this system, this farmers control system is playing in the environment. So the first big challenge for me is related to the policies and legal barriers. The second one is about the commercial seed dominance that exists also in this country. It's related to this policy framework, but if you look at actually where research is working, our public resources are used only to do the research on the commercial seeds, because for them, this is the more relevant one that can create wealth for a country. And secondly, the effort just to organize the market, the seed market, is around also these commercial seeds. Now, this is completely in contradiction with what I mentioned so far. So this second challenge related to the dominance of the seed is really very important. The third one is about climate change, because of this marginalization of the farmer seed systems, there is this issue of adaptive strategy are really missing in some cases, because you look at the Sahel countries, actually, we have too much rains, and we're missing rains, but there are many seeds that are adapted to this new situation, because using also some of this strategy is very problematic. The extension services are not supporting at all, so farmers have themselves to support all the cost of the adaptation and strategy that they have to develop. For me, this is the third challenge. And the fourth one is about knowledge erosion. This is really something very, very critical. Young people no longer know how to preserve, but also utilize these seeds. we call them traditional, local, or farmers control seeds. So this is something that is really missing actually in the national policies, how to bring more young people just to recognize not only the vitality of the seeds, their sustainability, and also the cultural background that is behind. As I mentioned, seed is also knowledge that are behind, that are very transformative on the talking about the sustainability dimension of the seed. So how to bring young people to get interested in the conservation, but also the reproduction of the seed, that is really part of a social reproduction of these communities. And the fifth one that I will emphasize on is related to the market issue. The market access, because in most of the cases, there is a limited economic incentives that are used for the seed system. And then pushing more, even some of the seed, hybrid seed that people are buying from outside, you may use a huge quantity that is even not reproducing, but at the same time, there is a lot of marketing dimension on them, and then just putting some of the constraints on this farmer seed. So having said that, there are other challenges that Shala have been mentioning, and even Simon also in contributing for the first time. And then we don't have any choice than developing strategies first that will go for policy reforms, advocacy for better policies that will be that farmer seeds control seed system will be at the heart of the policies is very critical. So the first strategy that need to be done is to work at that level. How to put more emphasis on this seed system, on the policies first. So the reform that we have actually in Mali, because for the last 4 years we have been working, redrafting our seed policy and our seed law. And actually, farmer seed control system is at the heart of this policy, but it's confronted to many challenges at policy level, because just there is corporate commitment just to prevent our government to adopt it. But actually, we are on a good track, and we hope that will be very soon it will be adopted. The second strategy is community initiatives. We cannot do work only at the policy level. We were just creating conditions at community level, not only to work more on the seed, continue to use them, but also all the knowledge behind should be also highlighted. So we can see that the role and place in the food sovereignty framework in a country, in all the countries, should be really highlighted. The third strategy is education and capacity building. We need to educate more people, because some people will say, okay, traditional seeds, because most of the name that is used is more traditional seeds. They are not productive. We cannot just use them because you have to feed millions of people. And then if you have to use these seeds, because they don't know what is behind. We don't know the capacity of this, not only for adaptation, but also the capacity to produce enough. We here using agroecological approaches and using some of these seeds, we have improvement in some cases with evidence, with fact that there is an increase of more than 30% of the production in some of the farms. So just emphasizing on the education and capacity building will allow to keep on track, not only utilizing this diversity, but also make them more relevant in the different areas that have been mentioning as challenges. And another dimension is the economic support. There is a need to invest public resources on not only on research, but also in improving, the way that people are exchanging these resources and then spreading it also in different agroecological zones and territorializing, the food system around some of the key crops that exist, talking about sorghum and millet, for instance, in the case of West Africa, but also some of the yams and some of the other products that exist as a key foodstuff in this region. There is also a lot to be done in terms of strategy climate adaptation. In climate adaptation, so because here in the Sahel countries, for instance, we used to say we are not maximizing the profit, but we are minimizing the risk. And minimizing the risk because of due to the the climate hazard that we are facing need to be based on these farmer seeds. It has to be based on that because it's allowed to adapt, but also to create conditions for whatever time that we have, we can produce, we can just process, and we can have access to nutritious food for the food sovereignty of the countries. And another way is how to develop collaboration between different stakeholders. And in that sense, there is a key point between communities and those who are called researchers, because farmers are researchers, pastoralists are researchers, fisher folks are also researchers. How are we bringing spaces that collaborative research will allow to work on the needs of communities, and that is the farmer seed system is the key, turning point for that. And then for the last point of your question, strengthening farmers' needs networks for diversity and climate resilience. There are some initiatives that can be encouraged and supported. For instance, community seed banks that exist actually in many countries in Africa that can be a way not only of preserving, but also adapting and working more in terms of research. Capacity building, I mentioned, should be really targeting, not only youth, women as custodians of the seeds, but also this group that are highly promoting actually agroecological approaches in the different countries. Policy support, but also gender inclusion is something that is very important, a strategy that needs to be developed, because those who are really keeping not only can support for a long time the economic dimension, but linking it to the cultural dimensions of the progress that VC are making, the contribution of VC that making, women are really at the center of that. So this gender inclusion is very important, and organizing also, there are very good initiative in Africa, actually, what we call the seed fairs. The seed fairs emphasizing exclusively on farmer seeds is very important. There is one that we have been participating in Zimbabwe with regional participation, but also at international level. And in Mali, we organize a lot in the regional level. And in West Africa, Jiminy initiatives in Senegal is very important for Kwaspe, and then decentralized next year, for instance, in Togo. That are initiatives, fairs are opportunities, not only to share resources, to exchange, but also to promote these issues, and also working, empowering local institutions, but also the issue of intellectual property should be addressed. Is very important because this is individual right over that is dominating collective right, and for the farmer seed control, collective right is very, very critical to be addressed. So this issue of intellectual property that we are breaking this barrier with farmer seed control seed system should be really highlighted. So there may be some other strategy that you can talk about, but there is a legal reform that need to be done to build capacities, to create conditions for supporting this, and also creating all the conditions that we have to do research, because there are so many evidence-based. We cannot just talk about scientific evidence-based, but farmers in farmer seed system, we not to talk about facts, because we are not asking just to spend 3 years just doing research, spending time and resources from farmers, very, very limited resources to say that we are producing scientific evidence. There are facts. They know that this is more sustainable, is more productive in many cases. It also is creating conditions for the food sovereignty, and then we need also to consider fact coming from farmers as data that can feed our research work, and that is very also critical in the future of the farmer seed system. So I will stop here, knowing that there will be probably time for questions and answers, and then to elaborate more on some of the points that I've been highlighting here.
Thank you, Mamadou, for that rich reflection and examples that you shared. Simon, in the publication, some of the articles talk a lot about farmers' rights and the situation in the global south. Are these issues around seeds mainly relevant for small-scale farmers, or are commercial large-scale farmers also affected?
I would say it's important for all farmers And not even that. I would even say that these issues are important for everybody who needs to eat. Because when there is no seeds, there is no food. And who controls the seeds finally kind of decides what's going to end up on our plates. And also as a consumer, I see with sorrow this concentration that has been highlighted by the other speakers of the seed market. And as every economist will tell you, monopolies lead to higher prices, and this will manifest not only for farmers, but also for consumers. And then I almost find even more important than the price question is the question like who decides what to grow and how. And when you look at these companies that dominate the seed market, these companies all are originally chemical companies. So before they started the seed business, they have been producing pesticides. And this also manifests in the products they sell. So very often these are GMO crops that are offered by the big companies. And most of these GMO crops come with resistance to certain herbicides. So they can sell it together with these herbicides. And then there is another aspect of monopolization. It's the whole patent questions that we also describe in the publication, that in some cases lead to the monopolization of genetic resources, of seed diversity by the companies that issue or that request these patents. And this really fills me with sorrow because we need that diversity and we're losing it at rapid pace. So if there are these patents, it can't be used freely anymore. And that we lose this seed diversity also fills me with sorrow because, as Mamadou mentioned, many of the seeds have properties that we need for the future to cope with climate change, but also to make our farming systems more sustainable. And therefore, it's important to maintain them because they're also used by the breeders, even by the big companies, as a resource for further breeding. And the best place to conserve them is not in a gene bank stored somewhere away, but the best place to conserve them is in farmers' fields, because then through the continuous breeding of farmers, it can evolve continuously and it can adapt to the changing climate, for instance, or changing preferences.
Thank you, Simon, for those insights. I'm looking at the Q&A here, which is very vibrant. A lot of questions coming through from the participants. And thankfully, they also addressed at the panelists, so I can ask you directly. The first question for Shalmali, coming from Sabrina Masinjila. She says, "Hi, Shalmali. Thanks so much for your presentation on the UN drop. What is your view on UN drop's implementation and uptake with the rise of authoritarian regimes, increasing stakeholderism and violation of human rights? What innovative approaches in the UN drop working group is discussion with civil society organizations and movements considering in navigating this? I'm going to also pose a question to Mamadou here, and then I'll give you an opportunity to each answer. Mamadou, the question is, would you say that criminalization of seed savers, farmers and food sovereignty defenders in the South work alongside international trade agreements, extension in the North? And then for Simon, a colleague, the participant, Brittany, says that a colleague of yours mentioned OHM yesterday in a webinar. Perhaps could you share more about how that works and whether it might protect farmers' rights to save, share, and sell their own seeds in countries like South Africa that have UPOV-aligned laws? Yes, so Shamali, I'll begin with you, and then we'll go in the same order that we've been following. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Thank you, Rafilo, and thank you very much for the questions that I've been seeing in the chat. I've been responding to some by writing, but I didn't see the last one. Yeah, I think not only the implementation of UNDROP, but I think the implementation of all human rights mechanisms are facing extremely challenging situations with the rise of an expansion of authoritarianism and the transformation of multilateralism into multi-stakeholderism. Because with multi-stakeholderism and corporations and businesses are at this, having the same status as governments and member states, the lines of accountability and responsibility between who are actually duty bearers and whose responsibility and role is it to regulate, to ensure that constitutions are implemented, that there is a rule of law, that duty, that responsibility gets blurred by the power of money with corporations sitting at the table. And I think this is also related very closely to corporate concentration. The expansion of multi-stakeholderism has happened because of an inability of all of us, of our institutions and our frameworks and our systems to be able to hold businesses and corporations and capital to account for violations of human rights abuses, for violations and destruction of the environment, of capturing and concentrating seeds, and so on. And in the absence of being able to hold them to account because they have so much money, and with money they can capture power, and so on and so forth, the next best thing is bring them to the table, let's talk, and let's try and figure this out together. But of course, you can put many people around the table at the same time, but there are power asymmetries. And if we don't address conflicts of interest, if we don't address power asymmetries, if we don't address the sort of invisible and hidden power that actors around the table are exercising, then it becomes even more difficult to implement human rights mechanisms and ensure that genuine rule of law with international, based on international human rights framework are being implemented. So I think we are at a very challenging time, not only for UNDROP, but I think for the entire human rights mechanisms. Now, when it comes to the implementation specifically of UNDROP or the rights holders of UNDROP, this is so closely related to the points that Simon and Mamadou have made. The issues of climate crisis, the issues of what's been happening with recurring financial and economic crisis, and then the issues of capturing the possibility of food through seeds. And then, of course, through many of the, as Simon pointed out, many of the commercial seed concentrators are also agrochemical concentrators and so on. So now, rural people and peasants also then, and indigenous communities and fisherfolk and herders, they also face this additional multiple crisis sort of challenge, because they are the most vulnerable. They're the least responsible for having triggered climate change and the extreme weather events, but they are at the front line. And their contributions to be, in the face of these, their real material contributions in saving lives, in protecting environments, in feeding the world, that is being eroded with multi-stakeholderism and authoritarianism, because there is a nexus between corporations and authoritarian governments. I mean, how shall I say, the power of money is a form of authoritarianism as well, because it negates the possibilities and the potentials of those who don't have that money, who don't have that capital, And so what happens is that we end up with report after report, basically making rural people and people who have so much to contribute to real solutions in the world, making them victims. And then coming up with new projects and new technologies to make them more advanced and more able to participate in this sort of new world of technology and digital, and digital food production. So I think there are a number of contradictions there that need to be addressed. What I will say about UNDRA, and I'm not saying this just because I'm a working group member, but I'm saying this because I genuinely believe this. UNDRAP is a very interesting, important document because it brings in one comprehensive document all those rights and which have already been guaranteed and enshrined in international human rights law. It's sort of like a mini human rights declaration, but oriented towards peasants and rural people. So it has rights in it which are already agreed by governments as international human rights law: civil political rights, economic social rights, right to participation. And then it also then advances the ground by articulating the right to seed, by defending and upholding food sovereignty, agroecology, the right to be free from repression, and importantly, the rights of migrant workers, regardless of their status, unorganized, not, or organized. So it is actually a very forward-looking declaration. It's a declaration that fits with our times. Now, a paper, but then without implementation, it's just a piece of paper. It's just nice words. So I think we need to work together to come up with creative ways of how do we take how do we take UNDRAP? How do we creatively implement it beyond reports, beyond writing those 2 reports for which are very important? But what else can we do together to build a sort of a global public push for these rights to be implemented? I put my email address also in the chat, and please feel free to contact me and anybody in the working group anytime to discuss this further. Thank you.
Thanks, Shamali. It really is a very wide scope, and it'll be interesting to hear also what views may come up in terms of how it can be used and implemented at country level. Mamadou?
Yes.
Yes, so the question is around criminalization. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that the answer is already on this on the question. The issue of trade regime is very instrumental in the criminalization of pharmacies. If you look at even at international level, actually, UNDROP has been a big fight from social movement to get that. But until now, there is no single trade policy internationally that is including food sovereignty as a perspective of the food system in the world. Despite all that have been done, it's done on purpose because the different disposition that exists actually in this food regime. And if you back up that with intellectual property issue, is completely excluding any kind of system that will put control of communities on these resources. It's all against that. So the criminalization of those upstream and downstream, the seed system, the farmer seed system is linked to the provisions that have been designed mainly by corporations, supporting only the institutions, but also the research that is linked to that. So it led us to bring in historical background of the international institution actually in charge of the food and agricultural issue. So if you look at this trajectory, we'll see that it has been planned from FAO to IFA to the TGRs and the like, and creating conditions. And you look at the configuration of spaces like CFS that people are trying just to also capitalize, because this is the only space, at least still, their social movement have the word to say and can then also try to change some of these things. So the criminalization has to do a lot with the trade regime, but also it has been embedded in some of the international institutions, including the UN one, that are supposed to create a kind of regulation and allow this space to move. So not only they seed themselves, but those who are promoting it are criminalized because all the instruments are just against the promotion of this system that will create more food sovereignty perspective in different regions and different territories.
Thank you, Mamadou. I'm handing over to you, Simon, on that last question that was raised.
Yes, like thanks to Brittany for the question. So you were talking about OHM. So maybe I explain quickly what that means. This is organic heterogenic material. So basically, these are seeds that do not belong to a variety that's uniform, because only varieties that are uniform can be registered through the normal way and are allowed for sale. So with the new organic regulation, it's allowed to sell this OHM. So you could compare them with farmer seeds because they're not uniform usually, or sometimes it's even allowed to mix varieties and circulate them as organic heterogenic materials. I don't want to go in too much into details because I'm also not an expert of the European regulation, but you can have a look in the publication. There is one article on this seed policy reform by Fulia Batur. And if you want to go more into detail, there are many experts in the who have worked from research or farmers' organization to push for that reform that will be better positioned than me to answer that question. So your question, if I get you right, was like if this OHM would also be a solution for South Africa. For me, it sounds quite complex and maybe it's not that accessible for normal farmers who just want to sell their farm safe seeds to fellow farmers. So maybe for that, there would be simpler solutions. As you mentioned, South Africa, as far as I know, at least there was under discussion that there is some exceptions for small scale farmers that are allowed to sell seeds that are not certified within certain limits. I'm not sure whether that process has been finalized and whether it's in place now, but at least there was some discussion. So this is, for me, would be one possibility to just give some exemption for farmer seed so that the rules for farmers who want to sell a bit of seeds are not the same as the ones for seed companies that their main business is seed production. Or another solution that we see in certain countries like India or Zambia. In Zambia, there is discussion about changing it, but up to now, the farmer seeds is just out of the scope of the seeds that need to be certified. So that, for me, would be the best solution because this gives the freedom to the farmers to sell their seeds and gives the liberty for farm-managed seed systems. In the best case, there would be on top of that even some support for farmer seeds and not exclusive support for the formal or certified seed sector.
Thank you, Simon, for clarifying and educating us on OHM as well. At this moment, I will move on to raise some of the more general questions that are not directed at any speaker. There's a question here saying, what is the significance, is there any significance, of UPOV and seed rights? Are we still developing country? As developing countries, we are still at risk of seeds. And the next question here is, how is the UN DROP working group working with the UN food systems teams in helping countries to roll out UN DROP implementation using the UN food systems tools and frameworks? This question, I believe, is directed at Shalmali. And another question is, how can this United Nations body, the working group, intervene when a country implements legislation that deprives farmers of their right to produce, sell, and exchange seeds? And then a question here that I can direct at Mamadou is, how can we deconsolidate seed dominance from big agricultural companies? What actions would support seed sovereignty, given that countries prioritize hybrid seeds by companies to bring forth foreign investments? And I think this example is quite evident across the different economic blocks on the continent. Mamadou, if you could please address that. And then here, another question that perhaps, I don't know, Simon, if you can address this one. It says, can we make some links and use the global biodiversity framework of the Convention of Biological Diversity, for example, on benefit sharing and genetic resources, in addition to UNDROP, to advocate against the corporate hijack of seeds? So I've allocated that question to you, Simon, but you can also, Shamali can also make some inputs. You're also invited to do so. Shall we start with you again, Shamali, and then follow in the same order that we did previously? Thank you. You are muted, Shamali. We cannot hear you. You are still muted.
Yeah, there. Could you just tell me the second question you had for me? The first one I got, the second one for me that you directed to me. Now you need to unmute. Now you need to unmute.
Thank you. The second question is about how UN food systems tools and frameworks can be used to support implementation of UNDROP at country level.
But there was one more. There was another one.
I guess that was the first one that I posed.
Yeah, I mean the second one. There was another one.
The one about Cambodia.
No.
Yeah. Can I ask that you please respond to this one first?
Okay, sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, okay, one thing is that, UNDROP was approved in 2018. And so we expected that member states would start implementing it in 2019. But the working group itself was only established last May. So we're not even 1 year old. And in this 1 year, in this 11 months that we've had, we were established in a very, shall I say, unsupportive, unconducive climate for human rights. So the UN system is going through a huge liquidity crisis, and in that, the Human Rights Council has the lowest budget. So we adopted our positions, being told all the things we cannot do because there are no, there are no funds to do this or that or the other. So what we started to do, so what we have been doing is, as a group, is reaching out to as many civil society, social movement, and then member state alliances who are willing to work with us, because most of them have not even heard of UNDROP. So it seems that in the last 6-7 years, there hasn't been much publicity done about UNDROP. There has not been much awareness raised about UNDROP. One of the outstanding exceptions here is a website called Defending Peasant Rights, which was established by FIAN, SETIM, La Via Campesina, and the Geneva Academy, who also fought for the declaration, over the 15 years, 20 years of its negotiation, right? So they've set up, and they're the ones who've been doing a lot of the informal interpretation and translation into different languages and so on. So with respect to the UN food systems, for example, groups, firstly, the UN food systems groups are not really functional except for a working group on agroecology, which is continuing, and we do talk to them, but there are no other teams. But we have been talking with the FAO Right to Food team and with other UN agencies that have national programs and regional programs to see how can we leverage what knowledge the UNDROP working group has and information about UNDROP and its and the amount of rights protections it has to be able to make sure that these rights then are implemented and upheld at the national level. So that's a dialogue that's happening. We're also reaching out, we reached out to the South Center, and we would like to make, at least as far as governments are concerned, at least reach the G77 in China and others to be able to get their support, since they voted for UNDROP, they agreed on UNDROP, they approved UNDROP in the UN General Assembly and the Human Rights Council. So they've approved it. What can we do with them to implement it? And implementation does not necessarily require a huge budget and a lot of laws. Basically, what it often requires is a respect for laws, good laws that exist, and steady dialogue with the rights holders of UNDROP to see where are the gaps, where are the challenges, and how can regulatory change be made to make sure that these rights are protected. Because although these are part of international human rights law, eventually all this has to land somewhere, and the place it would land is in the national sphere and in the local sphere. So from UNDROP, in the UNDROP working group, we have a quite complex strategy of taking a multi-constituency approach, working across the different rights holders' constituencies, working with different agencies, working with member states, doing as much advocacy and awareness building as we can with those countries of the global south, because that's where majority of the peasants and rural people live, but also then trying to win support from wealthier countries in the global north, because they are often in control or in positions of greater power with respect to governance. So, like I've said earlier, we are open. We do need cooperation from all of you. So let's work on this together. Let me just stop here and let me hear what Mamadou and Simon have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Shamali. Just to say that second question is about how United Nations bodies can intervene when a country implements legislation that deprives farmers of their rights to produce, sell, and exchange farmer seeds. Are there any avenues for that?
Yes, there are. UNDROP Article 19. And all the articles that I mentioned in my first round of presentation. If you want me to paste them in the chat, I can. UNDROP Article 19 is the right to seed. It's quite a long article which says what rights peasants have, and they have all these rights. And if these rights are not being implemented, then from an international instrument perspective, the groups in question can send a submission to us and say our rights to seeds have been violated. We will investigate and then send a letter to the government. And we have already done some actions like this, which I'm not allowed to say in a public seminar, not on seeds, but on other issues, where governments have responded positively and farmers have found relief. So small examples, but the system can work. But the other thing, and I think Simon, you and Mamadou can also maybe respond a bit more to these issues, having just done a study on seed laws. And I think Mamadou in AFSA has a sort of a regional approach to protecting the right to seed. So the United Nations aside, how can these regional initiatives also then how can they bring pressure on the UN agency so that then we can then respond more positively as a working group?
Thank you, Shamali. I'll hand over now to you, Mamadou, please, to respond, and then to Simon. I'm also cognizant of time, so that you have enough time to reflect, although I believe your answer also captured a lot of the questions that were raised. Over to you, Mamadou. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think Shall mentioned a lot of this. I will just, because the two issues are interlinked, the role that the UN systems can play in regulating what the big mess that we have actually with corporations on front line or all the seed system. I think, I've been mentioning it, there is a need really to rethink about the way that we are building alliances to lobby for policies and laws and international conventions that really need to change to support the pharmacy system. So this will go from from both sides. We cannot say that we just address it only working at international level, but we need also to address our regional bodies. It can be sub-regional, because all the good examples that exist actually should feed the reflection, because this is where we need really to work on at continental level, and this is what AFSA is doing. And for a long time, COPAGEN, the Coalition to Protect African Genetic Heritage, have been working to with the regional integration institution in West Africa, ECOWAS, but also WAEMU, just to reframe the seed policies, so that we avoid some of these hijacking of the food system, the seed system by corporations. Now, this work also has been contributing with case studies at AFSA level to have a framework. We are working on a framework that was supposed to be discussed at African Union level, so that this interaction between African Union and European Union can be an opportunity to put on the table this framework that will design, the seed conventions and the seed regulations in the continent, but also between continents, because some of these interferences between particularly Western countries and African countries, bilaterally or multilaterally, is really very instrumental in the action that corporations are making in our countries. So build alliances around that to change it from the continental level, and then also at international level. Second thing is also to engage directly on policy dialogue. Those men and women that are daily fighting in their farms just to make this happen. So we don't have to forget at all that the legitimacy of what's going on, just to decolonize our seed system, will go through those who are really facing daily the situation. This is farmers themselves and their organization, to be on front line to design what should be the best way of dealing with the seed system in their own country. So this is something very important. And thirdly, there is a big debate actually confronting what has been produced as evidence, as fact, as I mentioned. So we need really to show, if you look at what Africa is losing, head of states are shocked. And I've been talking only last week with some of the ministers, but we wrote a letter here in Mali to show how our food system has been dominated by some of the expenses that we are doing in buying seed from companies. They are shocked when we show them that in some cases, more than 70% of the kind of seed that we are buying are just benefiting to 6 companies all over the world. So we need to demonstrate, to decolonize the system, to completely destabilize to deconsolidate, as the first one mentioned, this corporate domination. We need also to go through this kind of system. So using facts and data to prove to our decision makers that this system is in a hole now. It cannot move. There is no way to move forward. When you talk about food sovereignty, you have to be coherent enough to know that food seed sovereignty is a critical point to move forward, in addition to land access and security and so on and so forth. So the local reform will be done. And also we should align with some of the instruments that are really very important today. We have the international treaties that that protect farmers' rights. We need to really promote them, and also to look at some instruments like UNGLO is a critical way actually to be promoted, so that the UN system that have been very, very instrumental in this dynamic can be also on frontline promoting it in other instruments, as I mentioned. This is the trade regime that exists, and then this go with the capacity building from different groups, but also policymakers. We need to build their capacity so that some cases they know what they are doing because it's corruption and other things, but in many cases they don't know. I have examples in Africa that many head of states or ministers themselves in charge of agriculture don't know what are the key challenges behind this kind of issue. So we need to strengthen only capacity for farmers, for movement, but also for policymakers. And finally, I think that there are opportunities that we have actually. The UN decade of family farming that UNDROP have been mentioning, but also the CBD, these are instruments that we don't know too much. Those who are fighting, researchers, but also social movement, we need to appropriate these and to move with them because they can give us the inclusive way of looking at the seed governance. So these are things that need to be done so that we deconsolidate, the hijacking of our food system by these corporations. I will just adapt what has been already said by Tal in a contribution to this question.
Thank you, Mamadou. I'm going to quickly hand over to Simon, but before I do that, I wanted to bring it to your attention that the links to the publication have been added in the Q&A. If you scroll up, you will see there a comment that was made by my colleague, Jan David. It has all the links for the publication so you can download Seeds at Risk. Thank you. Over to you, Simon. You are muted. Simon, we cannot hear you.
Sorry for that. In his last sentence, Mamadou just mentioned the CBD, the Convention on Biological Diversity. So this makes the perfect transition to my question, which was raised by Melanie Sursha, who asked whether we can also use the global biodiversity framework of the CBD to argue for seeds for farmers' rights together with UNDROP. And I would answer to that question with yes. In the global biodiversity framework, one of the new things there is that the rights of indigenous people and local communities are strengthened because also they have an important role to maintain biological diversity. So in one way, you could argue farmers are always part of an indigenous community or indigenous people or local communities. So in that way, this is also enshrining farmers' rights. I don't know where this development came from. Maybe there was also a certain influence by UNDROP. And what I also would like to mention, there is kind of the unknown little Swiss sister of the CBD, which is the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. It's another convention, also on biodiversity, but it focuses on the genetic diversity of plants for food and agriculture. And therein, there is also an article, the Article 9, that talks about farmers' rights. And basically the wording of the farmers' rights in UNDROP largely has been derived from that formulation at the Plant Treaty, at the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. So this kind of shows how things are linked and how the progress in one international body can also influence the other international body. And then, yes, we should use all this instrument to argue for changes of seed policies. I think it's not enough that they're just there and there is a international agreement that obliges the country, because most of the time there are no penalties, and the supervisory instruments, even though it's great that there is a working group on UNDROP, they don't have the possibility to punish a country that doesn't fulfill its obligations. So I think it's very important that people on the ground, farmers' organization, all researchers, all kind of actors, consumers also, they join hand and form alliances, how Mamadou actually mentioned it, and create evidence, make noise, then these international instruments, they can be very useful because they can be something to refer to. It makes a difference whether a farmers group or argues we just want you to change, or whether they have international instruments to argue with.
Thank you so much, Simon, for those very helpful insights, especially as we're about to wrap up today's event. I think although non-binding, these instruments, yes, do offer a lot of opportunities, whether through litigation, campaigning, and solidarity, even across regions, for people at grassroots level to mobilize and hold those in power accountable. With that said, I would like to give each of our panelists 30 seconds to a minute to share some closing remarks and reflections just very quickly before we end off. Thank you. I would like to start with you, Shamali, and then follow in the order that we've been following throughout.
No, I just want to thank you again for organizing this event and this discussion. This has, for me, has been a particularly enlightening and educational discussion because, you know, I mean, when I read UNRWA, for example, it is so complex and so comprehensive. And, you know, its articles have come from, many of them are directly from other conventions, some are paraphrased, but it's a learning for all of us in the working group as well, to understand how these articles there can be applied in different contexts, you know. And as Simon said, we're not a police force. We cannot force, we cannot punish when rights are not implemented. But people at national levels have laws, have constitutions, have agency, have democratic legal agency. Even in the face of expanding authoritarianism, there is agency. And my hope is that we can do a sort of a symbiosis between national possibilities, local possibilities, and what is available internationally in terms of, you know, advancing human rights. The local levels are super important because local officials know the reality. I mean, this is literally the ground and the territory where all this lands. So for us also, it's a huge learning event. I mean, learning process. I mean, and this has been a big learning event for me. So thank you very much. And I'm so impressed that there were so many people who joined this event. And it, I think, goes to show the importance of the issues that we've been discussing today, and also the importance that the organizers of this launch and of the study have given to this event. So thank you very much, and I hope we will continue to work together, build alliances, build collaborations, and work together for the realization of all the rights of rural peoples and small-scale food providers. Thank you.
Thanks, Shamali. Indeed, the participation has been incredible, and I didn't even get to cover all the questions that were raised in the Q&A. So thanks to the participants. Mamadou?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was a very knowledgeable session that we had. Always in this kind of situation, we learn a lot. I am constantly with Charles, but at iSpace Food, but all the time that we interact in a space, it's a learning process too. So mutually is very beneficial for that. So thank you for inviting me to join this panel. So just to sum up what I've been saying, that farm and managed seed systems are really pivotal in Africa, offering ecological, cultural, economic, and geopolitical benefit. So we have been dealing with how some of the continent like Africa can be completely locked in a system that will create, conditions for just destabilizing the food system in this continent. So addressing the challenges require holistic strategies. You cannot just have a one-fit model that blend also policy reforms, community empowerment, participatory research and innovation, but also ensuring that the systems thrive alongside of other agricultural practices. So we cannot disconnect actually what we are dealing with farmer seed system with agroecology, agroecological approaches, and then also related to the food sovereignty. When we integrate these approaches, farmer seed system can thrive and as pillar of biodiversity, climate adaptation, but also, and for the sake of this webinar, food sovereignty for our continent like Africa, but also all over the world over the world. I thank you very much for this opportunity, and hoping that people will also, in reading the publication, come back to some of the offers and then reacting with them so that we can change the current system that is really not in favor of food sovereignty. Thank you very much.
And lastly, over to you, Simon.
So now I get the challenge of the last words. Basically, I'm just echoing what the other speakers said. I think it's really important to create alliances between countries, between disciplines, between all kinds of people if we really want to change something. And this was also kind of at the core of this publication, Seeds at Risk. We really tried to give the word to the people who work on these different topics around seeds, so to make them more visible and to create more movement and put people in contact. And what makes me very optimistic is that so many people are interested in this topic. Usually when I talk about seeds, most people know very little about it. And we also try to change that through making these topics more accessible through that publication. So just a call to all the participants, please carry it along, read the publication, share it with others, talk to people, create a movement so we can move the topic forward and make a change for farmers.
Thank you, Simon. As we close today's launch event of Seeds at Risk, I want to leave us with a reflection and a call to action. Across the globe, we are witnessing a wave of seed law reviews and amendments, and this moment presents both a challenge and a critical opportunity. On one hand, it opens up space for amplifying the voices and struggles of farmers. Yet at the same time, we are seeing a concerning shift, for instance, in Europe, with the easing of regulations on gene-edited crops in the interest of biotechnology. And here on the African continent, we're seeing more restrictive laws in the seed sector. But this dual reality reminds us that the fight for just and democratic seed systems is far from over. In fact, the efforts to preserve and protect seeds, our shared heritage, are more urgent than ever. And with that, I also repeat Simon's words and ask you, everybody who's been here present with us having this discussion, to please share this report across your networks and really bring awareness to the issues that we've covered. I would like also to thank a few people who've made this event possible. In the background, Imen, Tokia, Delphine, Nadine, and Patricia. I would also like to extend a sincere thanks to the interpreters, without whom this event wouldn't have been possible. And a big thank you to our panelists, Shamali, Mamadou, and Simon, for generously sharing their insights with us here today. And last but not least, thank you to everybody who joined and participated in today's event, who posted questions and also shared the link for others to register and join. On behalf of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and Swiss Aid, I want to say goodbye, and until next time, keep well.
Thank you.